What I want you guys to do is I want you to leave in the comments what gives you purpose and meaning in life. Aside from what just allows you to get by, what sets your soul on fire? What makes you feel secure in your role as a human being, as part of a society? What's going on, guys? It's Bromley, and today we are going to do one of those once a month videos where we go outside of the realm of just lifting technique and training philosophy and programming. We're going to get a little more into the nitty gritty of life philosophy. One, because it's interesting for me to talk about, and making these videos is a lot more productive than me getting into long Facebook wars. And also because it is related to what we do as lifters. We're talking about engaging long-term in an activity that requires delayed gratification, personal sacrifice, planning, lasting through long periods of plateaus and disillusionment. And all of this leads to a lot of existential questions. So any chance I get to talk about our worldview with how we see our purpose and meaning, what drives us, I like to take the opportunity. I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea, which is why I limit these videos a little bit. So if you are looking for some programming advice and you stumbled across this video, go ahead and click to one of the other many videos I have on that. But if you do want to get into the why of lifting, why we do what we do, why we do anything at all, how we should internalize that, how this relates to our identity, that's what we're going to cover a little bit today. So I saw this tweet on Facebook somebody shared, and it rubbed me the wrong way simply because I disagreed with everything it said. But now I want to start out by saying I do the best I can to speak very clearly when it comes to my principles and what I believe. If you feel like you have a good idea that is essential to the way that people live their lives, it's your responsibility to phrase it in a way that people can understand and relate to. Understand that whoever your detractors are, whatever you don't explicitly say, they're going to fill in the gaps, and they are rarely charitable. So you don't want to have to rely on the charity of your potential detractors to fill in the gaps. That's how strawman arguments happen. So you are responsible for communicating as clearly as you can. So I try to hold myself to that standard, because this is going to talk about a few things. We're going to touch on gender roles. So I am going to speak specifically about the role of men and how they should identify and see themselves as providers. But understand that when I talk about those, I'm talking about what we tend to see over an aggregate between a lot of men and a lot of women, and how we see that in pretty much every society that's ever lived since the beginning of time, no matter how remote or isolated they are. So I do have some bias towards what you might think of as typical gender roles, but the progressive in me also understands that there's room for everybody. It doesn't mean you have to meet that mold. It doesn't mean that you should be berated or cast out of society if you decide to do your own thing. There's room for everybody. But understanding how these trends do tend to show themselves, I think that can give us some better insight into the recommendations that we make or the types of principles that we uphold. It's okay if that doesn't apply to you. There's room for all types. And also, we're talking about, the role of men as being providers or being useful. And that's not to say that only men are providers or useful, or that non-men are somehow not useful. That's not what we're saying at all. It's just that the discussion can be made by using typical experiences that men might relate to a little bit more than women. Again, we're talking about aggregates. The individual is not the group is not the individual. So no matter where you are on the human spectrum, if you relate to what I'm saying, good, because the underlying principles I'm going to talk to absolutely apply to everybody. This post starts, "The reason men are so obsessed with achievement is because nobody gives a fuck about men, including the majority of men. The closest thing you can get as a man to being cared about is being cared about because you're useful. Implicit to the role of provider is not being loved for who you are, but what you can do. True love is very rare. Most people are just using each other out of practicality." So when something really hits me the wrong way, I don't like to just dismiss it as being, oh, well, that person's an idiot. I like to dig in, pick it apart, get into why I think it's BS. And that helps me better define what I believe and why I believe it. So you're always trying to work towards a more consistent and even worldview. And the more opportunities you have to bump your ideas up against other people's ideas, the more refined and sharp those ideas get, the closer you get to the right answer. So it's very important to have a cohesive worldview. That's what I always try to do. So getting into this, why this hit me the wrong way. The first one is the reason men are so obsessed with achievement. I know plenty of men that aren't obsessed with achievement, and I know plenty of women that are just absolute killers. So that's not self-evident to me. But if we're going to start with that assumption, let's say men are obsessed with achievement. He's saying this is problematic because they only do it because they're trying to get validation. Now, to be fair, there is a dynamic, a dysfunction that can happen in families or in some cultures where relationships do become very transactional. We can think of very high-performing cultures. Japan's a good example. You have very, very rigid standards that are set, and the flip side of that, the downside, is that you get high suicide rates. You get a culture that is very concerned with a lot of the things we fought back against in Western culture for a long time. And that is having your entire existence defined by the expectations of your family. So we're taking a sliver of truth, which is when that pendulum swings too far and you get complexes and you get high suicide rates or high rates of depression. But you're taking that trade-off, and when it happens in extremes in society, and you're painting all of society, because this is just about men in general, men in all societies, or even men generally in Western society. And I think that's bullshit. It's not obvious to me that all men in Western society are obsessed with achievement. It's not obvious to me that because nobody gives a fuck about men, including men. I don't know where this person got that. I think they're taking their own shitty life experiences and projecting it onto society as a whole, which is not how we evaluate how things go on over a very large population of people. So I take issue with that. As far as nobody caring about men, I mean, I think there's plenty of people that could report just the opposite. There are plenty of cultures where the stereotype is that young men are seen as little princes, where they actually act out because they're not regulated, they're not disciplined as much as females are. I think there are plenty of instances, and I'm sure many females out there can attest to this, where they got it worse than the men, where they were held to higher standards, were rated more harshly, where men were able to be more promiscuous, and it's okay, where men were able to act out, and boys will be boys. My wife works in adult protective services. She's a social worker, and she routinely comes home with stories of elder abuse, where elderly women had their bank accounts drained or were even physically assaulted by their adult sons who were either mentally ill or in some type of crisis or in the midst of some drug addiction. And this dysfunctional dynamic exists where the enabling will not permit the mother to draw a boundary with the son, whether that's removing him from the household, pressing charges, whatever it might be. So they become martyrs. They sustain this abuse because their love for their son is so overpowering that it causes them to remove all standards for behavior. And that can be just as problematic, the complete removal of standards out of some sense of unconditional love. That can be just as problematic as the over-enforcement of standards, where relationships just become transactional. So it's not obvious to me that what he's saying is true. There are plenty of circumstances I can think that are more present, more prevalent in society than what this person's talking about. Men do shoulder the burden. We do all the manual labor. We die younger and in more violent ways. We are much more likely to encounter violence in our lives. We're expected to fight wars and to put ourselves at the front lines. That is cultural, and it's kind of universally cultural no matter where you go. So being a man is not necessarily easy, but to say that nobody gives a fuck about men, I think is about as wrong as you can get when it comes to trying to capture the zeitgeist of society. So going below that, saying the closest thing you can get as a man to being cared about is being cared about because you're useful. There's so many men I know just in my own life who are pretty useless. They do the bare minimum. They work, but you can't even really call themselves providers. And they all find women to take care of them. They all have their mom to go to and cry when things don't go well. The idea that there isn't a brotherhood between men, that there isn't somehow like camaraderie, or there aren't pockets where you can get cared for or have a sympathetic ear to listen to you or someone to gripe about your problems, that's just false. And if that's how this person experiences their life, I would strongly argue that they are an outlier, or that they have a particularly sad set of affairs. But that is not indicative of a society as a whole, no matter where you go. And implicit to the role of provider is not being loved for who you are, but what you can do. That's also bullshit. It can be both. People can love you as an individual and also hold you in high esteem because you're a role model, or because you're a good listener, or because you're emotionally supportive, or because you take care of your kids. And the problem I have with all of this is it tries to remove the incentive that should exist in society, that some things are better than other things. I don't like this idea that tries to eliminate all hierarchies, or it tries to pretend that all modes of living are just as good as the other. That's not the case. Some things are better. Self-sacrifice, service to others, that is better than living for yourself. That's not like a peculiarity of capitalism. That's not an economic circumstance. That is a reality of the human experience. Holding others above yourself, working for others, yes, you gain more favor with other people, and you absolutely should. So I don't know what this person does for a living. I don't know what their experience with service is as far as serving other people, but to try and call that problematic. I mean, we're in this era of pop psychology where instead of authorities and professionals, that the media holds up. Now it's just everybody with a Twitter account giving their hot take on what the human experience is like. And it's usually just their microcosm of human experience being grafted onto the rest of society. So to say that implicit to the role of provider is not being love for who you are, but what you can do, I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. If you can do more than the person next to you, if you are more caring, more loving, if you give more to your children, if you give more to the community, yes, you get held in high esteem. That's not problematic. That's how it should be. There has to be an incentive for people to do more, or else they won't do more. And that connects to how human beings actually are. Human beings aren't an island. Human beings left to their own devices do not do well. We're born into a culture, a society. That's how we're engineered. It's all the way down to our biology. Left to our own devices, we don't have policing, we don't have correcting to steer us away from our worst selves. Our better selves are always realized when we have some standard we have to meet, and when the pettiness, the jealousy, the impulsivity, the aggression, the hostility, the lower parts of ourselves that steer us off course, when those go unchecked, they can take over. It is society, and it is a framework that keeps us on the straight and narrow. It's like the cheater bumpers in a bowling alley. When you take those away, when you take other people away, and how we relate to them to steer ourselves on the right course, you have a human being that usually finds itself in crisis. You have a human being that is generally more empty, feels more isolated, feels more alone, and does not have a purposeful, meaning existence. So that's how I see it. So this seems to promote the idea that purposefulness or utility to others shouldn't be a metric for how much value you have. And that's gross. Like it is really gross. It's pushing people back towards like a very selfish, individualistic centered way of living where you don't have accountability or responsibility to the people next to you. And that's destabilized. This is just so foundationally flawed that I don't know how somebody got through this rant without trying to think about the precedent they were setting for what society looks like if this is what you believe. He even says true love is very rare, as if true love is unconditional, which that's a childish notion. Love is 100% conditional. If your children, your spouse, your loved ones, if they become abusive and dysfunctional and they generally make the lives of everyone around them worse, love tends to wane a little bit. That's how this works. So trying to remove the affection you think you should get from other people from like what you bring to the table, again, that's extremely weak. That's very narcissistic. It's actually disempowering because you're telling people that they should not be trying to hold themselves to higher standards, that whatever they do is good enough and they're entitled to all the same benefits as if they actually did more. And that's just toxic as shit. It's not just worse for society. You will not get a happy, well-adjusted individual if they do in fact live their life that way. That doesn't even have anything to do with the love they do or don't get from others. You won't have anything in yourself to congratulate yourself for having done or accomplished. So bringing this back to lifting, the reason I've done this for 20 years, it's not just because I wanted to be bigger or stronger. It's not just superficial aesthetics or wanting people to treat me a certain way because I look bigger. Of course, that's absolutely been a byproduct and it's been a net positive. But the reason I didn't stop a year in or 2 years in, when my arms got to a certain size or my bench got to a certain level, I didn't say, okay, that's good enough. It's because the process is what drove me. It's because having something to chip away at, having something to display excellence in, specifically something that society as a whole did not expect from me. The boundaries that other people set for me of what their expectations were didn't include this. I was overweight. I was a nerd. I was very introverted. I take all of the pleasure from lifting, from what I've done in the last 20 years, from going to being overweight and asocial to being an authority of sorts, to being confident, to actually doing well in this chosen field. The growth has showed me that I actually have agency in my life, that I'm not pigeonholed, that I can actually go out and engage in this like adventure of finding something new, figuring it out, molding myself to the demands of it, and actually displaying excellence in it. And that is the most empowering thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. And without a doubt, I'm not exaggerating. It is the backbone of my career, of my relationship with my wife, of my status in the community. Again, not because I'm a good lifter, but because my identity, what I internalize is I am somebody who can produce. I am somebody who can overcome obstacles, who can plan. I have security in my life, and that bleeds out in everything else that I do. because I demonstrated that I was able to make this transition over time. And it can be lifting, it can be anything. It can be business, it could be some other form of service. But the bottom line is what I do in lifting affected me in the way that I see myself. It affected my identity. It affected the way I make decisions. That affected how other people see me, how they interact with me, how they experience me. And that allowed me to provide actual utility and benefit to those close to me because I am secure, because I do represent stability, because I do hold myself accountable, because I am satisfied when I've met some objective goal, not just when I decide to pat myself on the back because I feel bad. And I'm hard on myself when I don't meet some goal that I know I was capable of because I gave in to the worst parts of my personality. Human beings are flawed. Sometimes you give in to immediate gratification. Sometimes you fall short. Sometimes you're impulsive. Sometimes you're just lazy. You don't want to do the thing because it's hard and, well, it's really fucking comfortable on the couch. I'm aware when I should have done something that I didn't do because some vice took over. That allows me to self-correct. That allows me to set standards that other people mirror. I have influence over people. I have people consult me for my opinion. The theme is, what I've heard more than once is, I have respect for your opinion because you don't bullshit. All of that is grounded in this concrete practice that I take part in every single day. It's grounded in the objectivity of what I set out to do and what I accomplish, which reinforces how I see myself, which allows me to go out and accomplish more. It's a cycle of productivity. It has been absolutely nothing but a net positive. It has augmented my life in every way. So there's the activity you engage in. In this case, it's being productive. There's the way you frame it. As a man, you have the opportunity. It's not about you should be productive. As a man, you have the opportunity to fill this role that makes life better for other people, providing for yourself and the people around you, being useful to other people. The people I have the most respect for were the people that could do jobs I couldn't do. There was a guy that ran an underground manhole company next to me. There were some good old boys that bought a giant rig from Pennsylvania for a fraction of the cost, figured out on their own how to fix it up, and ran what turned into a multi-million-dollar company out of no other reason than their own ingenuity and their desire to do something. And these guys helped me out more times than I could count. When I couldn't figure out how to do something, when something went wrong in my gym, when something went wrong on my car, they made themselves available. And I had this soft spot in my heart, not just because they were useful, but because they were generous with it. They understood the role they had to play in society. Their lives were better for it. Everybody else's lives were better for it. And when you have a population of people that live off that principle, you have something. You have something worth fighting for and preserving. And it's the people, I think, that start to see that get chipped away at, that become resentful of a lot of the new ideas on how people should live their lives, because it's not obvious to a lot of people that that's going to give a better result. And that's how I see that. Long story short, as a man, you have an opportunity to fill a niche in society by being useful. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. You don't have to stick to the mold. You don't have to stick to what everybody else is doing, but the opportunity is there. And trying to deconstruct the male role of being productive or useful, that's like deconstructing, the career of being a nun. Eliminating all of the good works that are done through charity and giving to the homeless and doing work for orphan children because you think the role of being a nun is too strict and too demanding. It's asinine, but it's sad. It's sad that people think for them to feel secure, they have to deconstruct the elements of society that have given so much to other people and that are actually foundational in the way that we live our lives and the way we experience our lives. So that's my rant on that. I know this went really long. I could talk about this for 2 hours, but it would turn into just an incoherent mess. So I'll cut it off here. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's anything I said that you agreed with or that you didn't agree with. And if you didn't agree with it, get into it. Write me an essay. Tell me why. What I want you guys to do is I want you to leave in the comments what gives you purpose and meaning in life. Aside from what just allows you to get by, what sets your soul on fire? What makes you feel secure in your role as a human being, as part of a society? Go ahead and leave that. I want you to leave your truest purpose, the thing you're grateful that you're able to participate in every day. Leave that in the comments. I want to get a discussion. And after the end of that, we can tabulate and see what those things have in common. And I think I can already predict what they're going to have in common. So thanks for watching, guys. Leave the comments. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.